There's an old saying about playing poker. If you look around the table and can't figure out who the sucker is, you're it. It was glaringly obvious that I was the sucker this time. It wasn't just that everyone else seemed to be in on the plan except me. The real kicker was the .45 automatic aimed squarely at my chest, held by a girl I never would have dreamed would point a weapon at me. The day hadn't started off well. Spooky had left the night before on another business trip. Where she went, or for how long, we never knew. It was the nature of her work, and we accepted it, along with the risk that she might not return. Her leaving at night always threw us off. Usually she flew out in the morning, giving us a chance to say goodbye properly, to exhaust ourselves as if it were the last time we'd see each other. And it might be, the nature of her job meant we had to face that reality. But her evening departure left us both unsettled all day, and I spent a sleepless night wondering if I'd ever see her again. Wondering what we really had. We'd been an item since she stalked back into my life 2 years ago, 12 years after we'd first met. I'd assumed it was just an unresolved infatuation on her part, something that would eventually burn out. So I tried not to take it too seriously. But whatever it started as, it became something else. I just wasn't sure what it was. I couldn't call it love, and neither would she. We were both too wary, maybe too broken, to admit to something as mundane as that. We weren't exclusive, and we had agreed on that. She was gone too often, and for too long. We had no schedule, no possibility of anything normal or sane. At least not for now. The divorcee tourists in hot pursuit of their midlife crises held little attraction for me anymore. It was becoming rare that I had to throw one out when I got the message from Spooky, letting me know she'd be arriving in a day or so. In fact, last night I realized I hadn't bothered with one of them in over a year. Although she never said anything, the look of relief on her face when she found her closet clear and her robe still hanging neatly on the bathroom door told me Spooky had feelings about that too. There was a hypnotic attraction between us, something neither of us, perennial loners, could resist. Something I don't think either of us wanted to resist. I was her comfort, her safe haven. She was my could-have been, the normal I couldn't have, didn't deserve after the life I'd led. Whatever it was, we clung like magnets when we could be together, even though I was far too old for her, and she was far too feral for anyone. She'd been a little off the last couple of weeks, moody and a bit sullen, but even in that mood, I wanted her near. And she seemed clingy despite it. Being apart was disconcerting, even more so than being together. Lately, I had been feeling more unsettled than ever. My older sister, Danica, had been chiding me about skipping family time at Christmas for the past few years. Maybe I needed to go, reconnect. I could find someone to watch The Shack for a couple of weeks. So, the day began with a sense of loss, disappointment, and fitful sleep. I was 10 minutes late opening The Shack, earning a scowl from Grease. He needed to pick up box lunches for his fishing charter. I was behind schedule, but he helped me throw them together, thrusting them haphazardly into a cooler. They didn't have to be perfect. Over half his guests wouldn't eat anything substantial while they were out anyway, due to seasickness. Grease didn't say much, probably sensing my mood. It was Friday charters, so I had the big grill set up on the beach in front of The Shack for his fishermen to grill their swordfish or tuna, or, if they'd had a poor catch, steaks. They'd swap lies around the bonfires and try to convince their unexcited wives that the experience was worth the cost. We'd just feed the wives margaritas, mojitos, and other drinks until they either enjoyed themselves or didn't remember not enjoying themselves in the morning. Whatever worked. I'd always loved the beach bonfire nights, despite the challenges they brought. Things had picked up since I made the deal with Grease and Angel a few years back. The tips alone made all the effort worthwhile, 10 times over. Locals flocked to these events, and wandering tourists would pay the party fee to join in. When she was around, Spooky looked forward to the Friday bonfires. They offered the kind of fun and camaraderie she'd never experienced as a kid. Initially, she was a wallflower, not believing such gatherings could exist. When Spooky wanted to be a wallflower, she was truly invisible. But after a few times, she joined in tentatively, then with more and more enthusiasm. Much to her own surprise, Spooky loved helping with the grill. But today, I was on my own. Howard was back in the States visiting relatives. Maybe I could convince X and Monster to help. Monster cooked steaks with the same precision he applied to everything. They'd probably be there anyway. They seemed to be on babysitting duty for Grease and Angel's 2 girls a lot lately. I needed to talk with X anyway. Loud Howard, Colonel Howard, United States Army, retired, had caught me before he left, whispering that she looked a little under the weather. We worried about X. A lot. If you're in the military for any length of time, you learn that obligations don't end just because you move on. A former soldier from your squad, 20 or even 30 years ago, still has a place to sleep on your couch if needed. You're still responsible for your people, for the things you've done, or in our case, created. We were the ones who trained Monster and built him to be what he was. We were responsible if he ended up going off the rails. Monster and X have no idea that we've figured out what's going on. Not everything, but enough. The injuries from his last mission did something to him. Something very bad. From what we can tell, he's stuck in what we call trigger mode. Some guys call it the zone, others going red. It's how we train team members to handle combat, suppress emotions, engage targets based on capability, intention, and immediacy, and survive through a running threat matrix. Deal with secondary issues later or not at all. Monster was seeing everything and everyone through that running threat matrix. Howard figured it out. Something felt off when he saw Monster in the hospital, so he dug deeper. He broke every privacy law ever written, stole medical records, psych evals, and hospital surveillance footage. He called in favors from years ago, got a few people working on it. Autopsies, news reports, accident reports, crime statistics, it all added up. Monster was fully operational in the tactical sense, eliminating threats. When Monster and X started coming out on vacation, it all became a bit clearer. He was using the techniques we'd taught him to work under cover, pretending to be himself. Monster was pretending to be Monster. Somehow X had become his handler. We don't know how it happened, but that's not really important. What is important is that she became his interface with humanity, and that is crucial. If anything happened to X, Monster would have no guidance, no restrictions. He'd just start working his way through his threat matrix in descending order. That idea was truly terrifying, especially since we had only a vague idea of how he was classifying threats and weren't sure what he was trying to protect. So, Howard and I sat down over a bottle of very good cognac and devised a plan. We called it the Very Bad Plan. It wasn't likely to end well for anyone, and might be worse than doing nothing. The plan involved a 4-wheel drive truck and 20 plastic buckets, each filled with 5 gallons of an enhanced version of ammonium nitrate fuel oil explosive. Each bucket would be rigged with an impact detonator, a dead man switch, and a remote detonator, a chicken switch, all on different redundant circuits. The idea was to drive into the big patio doors of his walkout basement at the back of his house while he was home and detonate nearly half a ton of high explosives as close to him as possible. If he survived, he'd likely be injured and moving slow enough for a sniper to take him out. It sounds insane, excessive. But Monster was really that dangerous. He was a true natural, gifted in the same sense and at the same level that a gold medal Olympic athlete is gifted. Reflexes, speed, precision, focus. Imagine the average guy using a lap pool suddenly dropping into a race with Michael Phelps. That's the difference. Except his event, his skill set, was very, very antisocial. One of the team snipers had given the iconic description of Monster. Shooting Monster between the eyes at 500 meters would show good aim. In the back of the head at 1,200 meters would show better judgment. Howard was a better long-range shot than me, so he'd be the sniper and manage the remote detonator. He'd also wear a suicide vest with a dead man switch in case Monster got loose. Monster tended to work up close and personal, so that was a reasonable precaution. I'd be driving the truck, so I wouldn't even know if the plan worked. I hoped Spooky would understand. It wasn't a great plan. His house was backed right up to the state park, and if he got into those woods, we were completely screwed. There were only a few good sniper positions, and he certainly had those on his radar. We figured we had a solid 30% chance of killing him. With any other target, that would have been laughably bad. With this one, it was as good as we could develop. We really hoped cancer or something would take him out before anything happened to her. We couldn't try to help X or let her know what we had figured out. If he suspected anything, she'd be the first one he questioned, and she would talk eventually. Howard and I, along with every former team member, would leap up in his threat matrix. We could only use the plan as a last resort because trying and failing would be worse for everybody. So X's health was very high on my priority list. On the bright side, X came in with Danny for breakfast just after Grease left. Danny is X and Monster's daughter. She's in her 20s now and married, in that cute zone of pregnancy, just after the morning sickness, but before the awkward waddle stage. She was a rare treat these days. Life was catching up to her, making it harder for her to get out to the islands. They had helped themselves to coffee and were sitting at one of the tables overlooking the beach. I walked over to Danny's side. She looks a lot like her mother did at that age. Tall, lean, and model pretty. Angel is prettier, but that's an unfair comparison. Judging anyone by Angel's beauty is patently unfair. "So, what does the baby want for breakfast?" I asked. She smiled, radiating eagerness. "The baby is seriously craving some of those spicy fried breakfast noodles. The baby can't get them stateside and wants them really badly." "You know, I gave you that recipe," I reminded her. "It just isn't the same without your greasy thumb in it, Pogo." "I tried," she said with a mock, sad face I'd been seeing since she was 10. "Some things just don't change." I shook my head. "Probably need to just take some beach sand back with you to sprinkle on it." Her smile softened. "It's great to see you again. Derek says hi. He couldn't make it. Big case coming up." "How long you out for?" I asked. She shrugged. "Not too long, just have to wrap up some things before the baby is born." She shot X a look, then looked up at me. "Family stuff." X shook her head with a smile. "Pregnancy makes them crazy, Pogo. Gotta get every detail squared away." She rolled her eyes, then paused. "And I think I'll have those noodles too." I looked at her. "You look a little tired. Everything okay?" She gave a wan smile. "Just worn out. Too much to do these days. Even coming out here to get some rest was a lot of work. Had a nasty touch of allergies before we got on the plane, still coming down from that." Allergies made sense. They'd just gotten back a few days ago. I'd let Howard know. I went back to the bar and got the noodles going. They really aren't that complicated, but the salt air probably helps, and maybe watching the surf come in is as important as the freshness of the green onions. My thoughts kept going back to Spooky and the whatever it is that we have. I wonder if I'm losing her. These last couple of weeks have been so unlike her. Spooky's like that half-wild cat that comes into your house when she wants, leaves when she wants, hunts the birds and mice and eats them rather than the expensive cat food you've bought, just to prove she's her own cat. Sure, she could be temperamental, but clingy and sullen just aren't like her. I wonder if she wants to move on, to leave this, whatever it is we have. I don't like that. I don't want to lose her, but I don't have any claim on her. I don't have any right to stop her or even to complain about it. She probably needs someone closer to her own age. That thought sours my stomach. It's not like I chose to get older. Hell, I was stunned when I survived to turn 30 a little over a couple of decades ago. It wasn't like nobody had tried to kill me. My survival is a testimony to the global problem of really bad marksmanship. Given how pervasive that problem is, they should probably start a charity. I can already picture Sally Struthers saying, "This is Pogo, and despite the thousands of rounds fired at him, he's still alive." With your help. Operators are standing by. The other kind of operators, of course. By the time the noodles are done, Monster is sitting with them. I don't have to take his order. Egg white omelet, a side of fruit, and just leave the Tabasco bottle on the table. He's been eating very healthy and taking care of himself. The whole reason he's in later than X and Danny is that he's been out running on the beach. He still drinks coffee and eats the occasional steak though, so there may be some remnant of humanity left. As I brought the food out, Monster greeted us with his usual friendly demeanor. If you didn't know him or what he was capable of, it was pretty convincing. Any chance you guys want to earn a little shack credit this evening? Greece has 3 charters out and I'll need some help with the grill, I offered. Danny perked up at the mention of beach bonfires, a tradition she'd loved since childhood. X enjoyed them too. I wasn't sure if Monster really enjoyed anything, but he always showed up, manned the grill when needed, and his mere presence had a sobering effect on rowdy patrons. One fixed stare from Monster was worth about 4 squad cars. The credit thing was just a formality. In my eyes, Monster and X were family and didn't need to pay for anything. They knew it too, but they never took advantage of it. Even if I didn't consider them family, Grease and Angel had made it clear that any tab run up by Monster and X would be covered by them. I respected that. Besides, the profits from the Friday beach bonfires were substantial enough that worrying about a free meal or two would be foolish. Danny eagerly accepted the invitation. Of course we'll be there. I haven't been to a beach barbecue in forever. X smiled warmly, a motherly expression crossing her face. No margaritas for you this time. Monster nodded solemnly, his demeanor serious for a moment. Danny playfully rubbed her belly under her brightly colored sarong. It's worth it. It'll be fun anyway. I'll just sit by the fire with Angel and make fun of everyone. Angel was in the same boat as Danny. She was just about as far along with her 3rd child. She'd always had a wicked sense of humor, though no one knew for a while. That seemed to settle it, providing a bit of relief, even though I fully expected them to agree. If they weren't available, I'd have to call Chief and ask him. He didn't have much tolerance for drunk tourists, but he couldn't resist a free steak. I had to haul the grill around front. I had a 4-wheeler just for that. I'd considered making it a permanent fixture, but I didn't want to spoil the view. Plus, the Friday bonfires wouldn't be as special without the ritual of setting up. Getting the massive grill in place and leveling it took about half an hour. Meanwhile, I left the shack open for serve yourself. The regulars kept watch to ensure no one cheated. Besides, I didn't unlock any booze before noon, and even then, it was only beer and wine until 5 due to local laws. With Chief keeping an eye on things on and off throughout the day, taking that bet wasn't worth it. Just after I returned inside, 2 bolts of golden lightning shot through the front door. Kisa and Lily, 2 golden-haired, blue-eyed wonders, squealed with delight. They paused for a quick kiss with X before swarming into Monster's lap as if it were reserved seating. Kisa chattered excitedly to X about something she'd found on the beach, while Lily gently traced the scars on the side of Monster's face with one tiny hand. I didn't understand it, but Monster seemed more human around them. I struggled to recall how he was with his own children. Maybe, just maybe, this meant something. I needed to talk to Howard about it. Perhaps this was a piece of the puzzle we'd been trying to figure out. That thought doesn't last long, because if Kisa and Lily are here, Angel isn't far behind. She walked in wearing a cornflower blue sarong that perfectly matched her eyes. Everyone in the shack paused for a second, subconsciously catching their breath before continuing their conversations. Looking at Angel is like staring into the sun. She had always been beautiful, but since reclaiming her little girl and claiming Greece as hers, it was as if someone had unveiled a star. Pregnancy seemed to enhance her radiance even further. Chief once told me that he believed it was because everyone wished she would have as many babies as possible. Her girls resembled her so much, and that alone made the world more beautiful. Angel flopped into the chair Danny had occupied earlier. Danny had obviously wandered off somewhere, with an exaggerated sigh of relief. It was all in jest, of course. She was her usual radiant self, and the short, easy walk from her house, even with herding her little girls along, didn't faze her. I poured 2 cups of guava juice and filled a glass for the 3 of them. It was the girls' current favorite. Likely more for its sweetness and pink color than for its flavor. After all, they were still little girls, and Angel always drank whatever they did. Gracefully, Angel took her glass, while Kisa and Lily chorused a heartfelt "thank you" before dissolving into a fit of giggles. While the girls giggled, Angel took a long sip of her drink and glanced up at me. "There will be about 30 guests at the bonfire tonight." Thomas called me over the radio. Thomas is Grease, though Angel is the only one who calls him that. It's part of her claim on him, a claim that defines her as much, if not more, than her beauty. As stunning as she is, no one dares to flirt with her, not even drunken, obscenely wealthy tourists. Her devotion to him is unmistakable, worn like an impervious suit of armor. I've seen men try, their clever strategies and rehearsed lines falling flat before they're even spoken. It's that obvious. A mischievous grin played on her lips. "They'll be starving by sunset. He joked that you and he could have saved time by tossing the food straight into the sea." I chuckled to myself, knowing that no matter how wealthy you are, you can't buy sea legs. "I'll make sure there's plenty of steak." Something flickered across Angel's expression. "Could you also prepare some of that street chicken? Some of the wives aren't big fans of steak or fish, maybe about 15 breasts." Street chicken is another specialty of the shack. Found from Bangkok to Phnom Penh to Hanoi, it's simple yet delightful. It's best with thighs, but for the wealthy, chicken breasts suffice. Just soy sauce, garlic, onion, black pepper, a touch of palm sugar, or brown sugar in a pinch, and a bit of vegetable oil. Marinade for an hour if possible, then grill it over charcoal, skin on, to retain moisture. For what Angel requested, I'd need to make at least 6 times the amount. The aroma of the chicken carries down the beach, drawing in wandering tourists like a magnet. Some would pay just to taste a morsel of that savory delight at the beach party. "I'll go check. I can always send someone over to Nomo's for more if I don't have it," I assured Angel. She smiled in gratitude, but there was a hint of something unreadable in her expression. Sadness, perhaps. It was unusual for her. Angel was typically the happiest person I knew, second only to Grease, of course. As I headed back towards the storeroom, X followed closely, mentioning she wanted to grab a couple of packets of cookies for the girls while I was there. Angel's demeanor troubled me. Something was definitely wrong, I sensed it. Absently, I flicked on the light and entered the storeroom. The feeling intensified. Something was definitely off. And then X closed the door behind her. "Monster knows about your plan," she said bluntly. My breath caught in my throat. I was as good as dead. Or worse. There was almost no chance of survival, especially if I tried to reach the shotgun behind the chest freezer. Maybe less than a 10% chance, even if I managed to get to it before Monster burst through that door. "Don't," came a different voice. It wasn't X's voice. It was someone perched on the chest freezer. My horror deepened as Danny revealed herself, drawing a subcompact .45 from under her sarong with a liquid economy of force and effortless speed, almost too quick to follow. Her wrist twisted subtly as she aimed the gun. "Monster taught you," I managed to say, stunned. Danny's smile held a touch of pride. "Dad made me practice all the time." "It shows," I whispered, realizing the depth of what she had become. "Keep them talking. If they're talking, they're not shooting," I thought desperately, edging sideways to get both X and Danny in my line of sight, hands raised slightly in a futile gesture of non-aggression. But the gun followed me effortlessly, trained on my chest like it had a mind of its own, like Monster himself was holding it. There was no chance. If Monster had trained Danny this well, shooting me would be instinct, not choice. X, unarmed but leaning against the door, was a silent reminder of the danger beyond. The warning, "Here be monsters," flashed through my mind. They were both in on it, and Angel, who had sent me here, must have known. X broke the tense silence. "We need to talk. Monster knows that you've figured out his condition." I didn't bother denying it. Denial would only prolong the inevitable, fuel their frustration. "He's active in the States, unofficially. We saw him before he had a cover." "He's protecting the children, and the grandchildren," she added. I considered her words, but it didn't change the fundamental issue. "With your guidance, with you tempering him, what happens if something happens to you?" "He has a contingency plan," X replied cryptically. Danny shifted, her presence now asserting itself. "I'm part of the plan." "You think he'll listen to you?" I asked, struggling to buy time, to find an angle of escape that didn't involve bloodshed. She took a deep breath, inhaling once deeply. "That's it." Or, "He understands he might unintentionally pose a threat to the grandkids. So he's been training me since I was 7. He couldn't bring himself to harm me, even if he could harm Finn or Patrick. Probably not them, but definitely not me." I blinked in disbelief. Monster had prepared his own daughter to potentially kill him if necessary. X looked down briefly. "And we have a fallback plan for that." I closed my eyes briefly, connecting the dots. Kisa and Lily. That explained the constant babysitting. They were becoming more and more his the longer Monster spent with them. "And shameless. He'll listen to her to protect them." X's voice carried a distant tone. Shameless. That was what she called Angel. Angel wouldn't knowingly put me in danger, but shameless? She would go to any lengths to protect her children. She already had, and there was no more formidable guardian than Monster. X continued, her voice hollow. "If something happens to me or Danny, Monster will return here. There's minimal threat here, and he can watch over Angel's girls. He knows you can help with that." "I'll need to inform Howard," I muttered. Danny's smile turned slightly predatory. "Finn's already talking to him." She paused, her smile widening. "And Patrick is overseeing the installation of a swimming pool in the backyard, just off the patio." From my expression, she could see they had guessed correctly. "Dad thought that might give you about a 25% chance." 30, I corrected, my mind racing with the implications of their revelations. Danny grinned openly. "Where'd you pull that extra 5% from?" "Howard always wears a vest, frag and a dead man switch," I replied. "Ooh, wicked. I'll have to remember that," Danny mused. "So what now?" I asked, feeling the tension ease slightly. With a smooth motion, Danny reholstered her gun and slid off the freezer. "You have chicken breasts to count, and I have to go pee. My bladder is the size of a peanut right now." She brushed past me, and X held the door open for her. "I remember that. It sucks, having to pee every 15 minutes and it's like 3 drops. X's expression softened with a hint of sadness as she turned to me. "We appreciate what you and Howard were doing, we really do. But it's taken care of. Danny just wanted this settled before she had the baby. It was genuine when she said it was family stuff. You and Howard are family too, you know." She smiled again, a touch of humor in her eyes. "It really is just allergies, Pogo. I promise." With that, X walked out, leaving me to process everything with a mind racing a mile a minute and a pile of chicken to bring out. By the time I finished my tasks, they had all departed, even clearing their table. The beach party unfolded in a mix of normalcy and strangeness. The grill sizzled, the fires crackled, and the music set the mood perfectly. Even the trophy wives seemed to be enjoying themselves, though my tequila supply was dwindling rapidly, which might have been basic chemistry and biology at play. Details I'd never noticed before now stood out sharply. Angel and Danny, dressed in matching sarongs, giggling over something, perhaps me. It struck me how similar their mannerisms were, a revelation in itself. Monster engaged in a playful pirate game with Kisa and Lily, their laughter echoing joyfully. Only now did I realize their swordplay mimicked the first Eskrima drill we taught to new team members. Monster was already training them, just as he did with his own children. X observed with evident approval. Whether it was because the girls were enjoying themselves, or because both little blonde girls had mastered the first form of the fighting stick perfectly, I couldn't quite tell. As I headed over to replenish the chicken supply, tourists were flooding in, prompting me to send a runner down to Nomo for more chicken and soy sauce. Angel intercepted me along the beach. "I'm sorry," she said softly. "I understand, Angel," I replied. "It's for the girls, and Thomas. I have to protect them." Her accent thickened slightly, and her usually brilliant blue eyes seemed to dim with worry. I hesitated, preferring to speak with Angel rather than Shameless. "It's a great party tonight. The chicken is flying off the grill as fast as I can make it. It was a really good idea." Angel caught my subtle hint. "I really wanted the chicken for myself. It's my favorite. Sorry for tricking you into it." A mix of Angel and Shameless. I could settle for that. Grease remained as clueless as I had been. I didn't say a word to him. There was no need for him to know that even though he was married to Angel, Shameless was still watching over all of them. Cleanup lasted until nearly 1 a.m. I was in the process of making a sign to announce a late opening of the shack so I could catch at least a few hours of sleep. It's good to be the boss sometimes. She walked in silently. Donna was in her usual suit, but her bodyguards were wearing flowered aloha shirts, of all things. It didn't disguise their nature. A thug in an aloha shirt looks like a thug in an aloha shirt. Their sidearms were clearly visible beneath the fabric, adding to the uneasy feeling settling in. Spooky. God damn it. My spooky. I gripped the bar, feeling my knuckles go numb as I struggled to breathe. I didn't want to let Donna speak. I didn't want to hear her say it. Something had gone terribly wrong, or Donna wouldn't be here. She pulled out a chair at the nearest table and sat in it primly. "Sit down, Paz." She's the only one who calls me that, and only when it's damn serious. Walking over to the table felt like an eternity. I grabbed a bottle of black rum and 2 glasses on my way, hoping to buy just a little more time. 30 seconds more without having to face it all. I sat down, poured us both a generous amount, and downed mine in one go before refilling the glasses. She did the same, and waited patiently while I poured another round. "You know I wouldn't be here if it wasn't serious," she started, her tone heavy with gravity. I nodded, unable to speak yet. "It's just bad luck. She didn't make any mistakes. Sometimes shit happens," Donna continued, her voice softening. I took another deep drink, trying to absorb her words. "One more year would have been 15. She could have walked away if she wanted to, no questions asked," she murmured, staring down at her hands. Suddenly, a mischievous grin spread across her face, sharp and unexpected. "How the hell you knocked her up, I'll never know. We take precautions against that," she chuckled dryly. It took me a moment to catch her meaning, and she pressed on. "No way in hell I'm forcing her to get an abortion, or risking my nephew or niece on a damn mission. Shit. Imagine how pissed Mom would be if I got her grandchild killed." I glared at her. My sister Danica had gone by Donna since before I was born, and here she was, finding humor in this situation. She grinned wider, a genuine smile this time. "Don't be an asshole. She's worried sick that you'll kick her out. She's waiting at your place, scared out of her mind. She loves you like crazy, you know. She's just not good at saying it. And you know it's your kid. She's practical. If there was even a hint it could be anyone else's, she'd have had an abortion. She stopped doing swallow and honey trap work over a year ago, at her request." "Why the hell?" She cut me off, her tone firm. "I wasn't just doing this for kicks. Well, maybe a little. I needed to know you felt the same way before I let you go home." I stared at her, trying to process everything she had just revealed. She's been through a lot in her life, Paz, Donna continued, her voice softening slightly. Maybe despite the age difference, your life experiences aren't as far apart as they seem. She stood abruptly, a serious look in her eyes. Paz, marry her and bring her around for Christmas, or, so help me God, I'm telling Mom. With that ultimatum hanging in the air, she turned and walked out without another word. As soon as she was gone, I locked up the shack and sprinted down the beach. The sign on the door announced it, closed all day due to family issues. Story 2. Here's a rewritten version of the provided text. I gazed at the open bag on the gleaming bar before me, sensing trouble brewing. Howard shot me a quizzical look, while across the room, X struggled to suppress a smirk. Monster seemed indifferent, nursing his rum, though I knew he was paying attention. He didn't miss much. The can of whipped cream sat cold, condensation forming on its surface, its price tag revealing it came from Nomo's Market, a few blocks away from the shack. This situation was seriously messed up. Only 2 people besides myself would recognize the significance of the corn oil and whipped cream. One had passed away 3 years ago. As for the other, I wasn't certain. I am Poznak Godek, Sergeant Major, United States Army, retired. The youngest son of hardworking Polish immigrants who fled the oppression of the Warsaw Pact, they epitomized the American spirit despite their thick accents and traditional Polish holiday meals. They proudly displayed the American flag daily and held an unyielding pride in me. Here's a rewritten version of the provided text. I'm uncertain how much pride they'd feel if they knew what I've had to do to protect the country they cherish. But they're practical folks, so perhaps it wouldn't trouble them as deeply as it does me. Poznak Godek was quite a mouthful, so it didn't take long before I was dubbed Pogo growing up. I thought I'd shed that nickname when I joined the Army, but barely 2 minutes and 33 seconds into basic training, I was Pogo once more. Just like that pesky possum from the Walt Kelly comic strip. With my slightly round nose and a thick tuft of light blonde hair, which turned entirely white by the time I hit 30, I was tagged for life. Nomo had delivered the package just moments earlier. He didn't accept credit cards or phone orders, which meant Spooky must have been nearby on the island, probably no more than 3 blocks away. 12 years is a long time to nurse a grudge, but Spooky might. 12 years ago, I took leave to assist my friend Eugene. He'd been shot in a home invasion near Coal City, just outside Chicago. Eugene and I were practically inseparable in high school before I joined the Army and he joined the Corps. We made an odd pair, the big black guy and the big blonde Polak. We chased girls, drank beer, and barely scraped by in algebra together. We weren't top of the class, but we managed to graduate. Given the tough job market, the Army and the Corps were our only viable options, neither of us having the means for college. Here's a rewritten version of the provided text. We stayed in touch over the years, meeting at least once annually to hang out, drink beer, and trade stories. Eugene had left the Marine Corps Military Police after 8 years to fulfill his passion for sandwiches by opening his own shop. He loved being a Marine and enjoyed his time in law enforcement, but Eugene had always been obsessed with sandwiches. His shop was a masterpiece. Brick floors, oak counters and tables, brass accents, and Sinatra tunes in the background. He crafted sandwiches with roast beef, pastrami, and countless other fillings on freshly baked bread, offering a myriad of toppings, served alongside thick-cut fries. While hard liquor wasn't on the menu, the beer selection was top-notch. Dining at Eugene's shop was an experience. A bit pricier than your average sandwich joint, it drew patrons seeking a substantial meal rather than a quick bite. Eugene truly had a passion for sandwiches. He was good-natured and treated everyone kindly, even cooperating with the robbers during the ordeal. He just wanted it to end without anyone getting hurt. Unfortunately, it didn't go as planned. Eugene was pistol-whipped and shot in the thigh, shattering his femur. With 30 days of leave accumulated, I rushed to his side as soon as I received the call. We had just completed a mission, so it was a fitting time for leave anyway. When I arrived at the hospital, Eugene was sitting up in bed. "So, I guess the Corps forgot to teach you how to dodge bullets," he quipped. "Must have been out too long, my bulletproofing wore off," I replied. "What happened?" he asked. "I fell for a classic bait and switch. Damn, I even knew there was trouble in the area." Shaking my head, I added, "Anyone could have fallen for that. There's a reason it's a classic." Here's a rewritten version of the provided text. The bait and bitch, or B&B, was a standard robbery tactic. A seemingly harmless woman shows up at your door or flags you down on the road, feigning distress with tearful eyes and a sob story. Her car broke down, she's lost, she can't find her dog, anything to lure you in. Meanwhile, the heavy lurks out of sight, waiting for the opportune moment, when the door is unlocked or the vehicle stopped. I've employed it myself countless times to gain access to targets. Donna was my partner in crime for this. She could play the helpless and innocent act in 20 languages. It was far more effective than the pizza delivery ruse. Eugene shook his head, staring down. Still, I should have been smarter. I thought if I just played along, let them take what they wanted without a fuss, they'd leave. I'd file with insurance, everyone walks away, and I'd finally get that Mastiff puppy. Lesson learned. I glanced at his injured leg. "And how did that turn out for you?" He rolled his eyes. "The guy with the gun, this skinny prick, decided to crack me over the head and shoot me in the leg while I was down. The girl cursed him out the whole time. She was furious." "Do the cops have any leads?" I asked. "Doesn't sound like it. Actually, it sounds like they don't care much. I'm alive, and they're dealing with unsolved murders. They've assigned the JV squad to my case. The team lead is younger than socks I've owned." I understood. Eugene was alive, the victim of petty criminals. The police had bigger issues to handle until these small-timers escalated to murder. Still, it infuriated me. Eugene was one of the good ones. If your tire blew out, he'd change it for you. Short on cash? He'd spot you $20, knowing you might never pay him back. Here's a rewritten version of the provided text. "Damn, he used to take extra sandwiches in his van to the park after closing to give to the homeless. He'd stay late, making those sandwiches himself." "What's on your mind, Pogo?" Eugene asked. "You need help at the shop?" I offered. He shook his head. "Nah, got a great girl managing it. I trust her. She keeps everything running smoothly, and everyone respects her. Fresh out of college, but sharp as a tack." "Doesn't take much then," I teased. He grinned. "She's my niece, but she's still brilliant." "Anything else?" I inquired. He started to say no, then hesitated. "Pogo, I can feel it. They're not going to stop. It's only going to get worse until someone gets hurt. Someone innocent." I nodded in understanding. "I think they might have spotted me at the ATM on 9th Street, near the laundromat. They knew I had cash, and that's the only place I can think they could have known." He sounded uneasy sharing this with me. Over the years, Eugene had learned more about my career than anyone else, except maybe me. What should I be looking for? Here's a rewritten version of the provided text. Salt and pepper. The heavy's a skinny black kid, early to mid-20s, almost 6 feet tall, right-handed, with some kind of tattoo on his right forearm. He carries a 1911, probably a Kimber, in 9mm. The bait's a petite white girl with brown hair tinged with red, around 5 feet tall. Her eyes match her hair color. She's exceptionally good at playing innocent, and I suspect she's the one calling the shots, even though he thinks he is. She tore into him for shooting me. She even dialed 911 on the house phone and dropped it as she left. A soft spot? He gave me a look from beneath furrowed brows. Number, she's tough. I got the feeling she just didn't want me to bleed out and attract more trouble with a homicide charge, which suggests she's likely sticking around. She was professional, let him touch anything he wanted in the house, but she kept her hands in her sweatshirt sleeves, even when she picked up the phone. She's older than she looks, appears about 17 at first glance, but could be in her early 20s. He glanced out the window briefly. Pogo, if you don't have to, don't kill them. I didn't respond. I avoid making empty promises, even implied ones. The painkillers kicked in for him then, so after a few minutes, I left to find somewhere to stay for a couple of weeks. House hunting is a headache. Even in a less desirable neighborhood, there are always too many questions. Here's a rewritten version of the passage. After some searching, I finally settled on a slightly run-down single home with a dirt floor basement. The owner didn't pry, and while it lacked appliances, I figured I could manage eating out. Plus, it wasn't far from an all-night laundromat. I stashed my actual luggage and IDs in a bus station locker, opting instead for worn but presentable clothes from Goodwill. Moving in was straightforward. With no furniture, I bought essentials like a lawn chair, a blue tarp, tools, screws, bolts, assorted hardware, and a sleeping bag. A few groceries, a styrofoam cooler, a copy of Stephen King's It, and a deck of cards rounded out my setup. Then the real work began: hunting. It felt more like fishing with a cane pole than traditional hunting, requiring patience, of which I had plenty. Blend in slowly, become part of the routine, the everyday. Find the right appearance, well off enough to be worth targeting, but not enough to seem risky. Withdraw cash from ATMs, pay with cash for groceries. Move a bit clumsily, as if recovering from an accident. Predators and scavengers target the weak and vulnerable. I nearly missed her. Honestly, I did miss her. She was that good. I only spotted her because her partner had the surveillance skills of a fourth grader playing hide-and-seek. He was tense, constantly checking on her position. I sensed her frustration with him. If she had been alone, I might not have noticed her. Maybe she had been alone the day before, or for the past few days. She was a ghost, blending seamlessly into the background. Impressive and eerie at the same time. I allowed myself a moment of admiration for her skills. You have to respect that level of expertise. It reminds you to be more cautious around individuals like her. Here's a rewritten version of the passage. I stuck to my routine. Hit the ATM, withdrew cash, then headed to the small grocery store. He was still tailing me, though I couldn't spot her. But then, I wouldn't. Damn, she was good. It irked me a bit, and that always made me a little reckless. I suppose it's some twisted form of pride or machismo. I started deviating from the script. Inside, I smirked as I grabbed a small bottle of corn oil from a dusty shelf and a can of real whipped cream from the dairy section. I even opted for the name brand, Extra Creamy. Screw 'em if they can't take a joke. I strolled home along my usual route. He was almost comically inept. It was like watching a bad episode of Get Smart. I half expected him to answer his damn shoe. She, on the other hand, remained nearly invisible, effortlessly blending into shadows and awkward angles without raising any suspicion. I arrived at the house almost too quickly. I could have happily led them on a few more turns, just to see how Spooky handled changes in light and shadow. Just to observe her skill. She was a natural. Still, it was time to get this show on the road. I slipped into the house and secured the door, assuming she'd be cautious enough to wait 15 to 20 minutes for me to settle in and let my guard down. But I couldn't be certain. I prepared everything swiftly and settled in to wait for their arrival. She was even more cautious than I anticipated. It took nearly 30 minutes before she finally knocked on the door. Here's a rewritten version of the passage. I stuck to my routine, hit the ATM, withdrew cash, then headed to the small grocery store. He was still tailing me, though I couldn't spot her. But then, I wouldn't. Damn, she was good. It irked me a bit, and that always made me a little reckless. I suppose it's some twisted form of pride or machismo. I started deviating from the script. Inside, I smirked as I grabbed a small bottle of corn oil from a dusty shelf and a can of real whipped cream from the dairy section. I even opted for the name brand, Extra Creamy. Screw 'em if they can't take a joke. I strolled home along my usual route. He was almost comically inept. It was like watching a bad episode of Get Smart. I half expected him to answer his damn shoe. She, on the other hand, remained nearly invisible, effortlessly blending into shadows and awkward angles without raising any suspicion. I arrived at the house almost too quickly. I could have happily led them on a few more turns, just to see how Spooky handled changes in light and shadow, just to observe her skill. She was a natural. Still, it was time to get this show on the road. I slipped into the house and secured the door, assuming she'd be cautious enough to wait 15 to 20 minutes for me to settle in and let my guard down. But I couldn't be certain. I prepared everything swiftly and settled in to wait for their arrival. She was even more cautious than I anticipated. It took nearly 30 minutes before she finally knocked on the door. Here's a rewritten version of the passage. I pivoted to my right, mirroring his movement. It's an old trick from the gunfighter's handbook. This placed me outside his raised arm, where it's weaker and slower to react laterally. It's a small detail, a subtle advantage. But mastering these nuances is how you become an old gunfighter. I'm not Monster. I lack his innate talent, his speed, his surgical precision. But I trained him, and the monsters who came before him. I seized the raised pistol with my left hand, forcing it upwards. His finger had left the trigger when he tried to pistol whip me, so now my hand and wrist obstructed his motion. He faced another issue, unable to pivot effectively to throw a punch, as my right hand swung up and he found himself with a face full of whipped cream. As he struggled to clear his eyes, losing focus, I discarded the can over my shoulder. Capitalizing on his distraction, I gripped the heavy pistol with my right hand and brought it down hard between his eyes, channeling all my strength into the blow. His nose crunched under the impact. Once more, for good measure. His eyes rolled back as he crumpled backward, suddenly limp, a mixture of whipped cream and blood staining the scene. Screw him if he can't take a joke. The girl had already moved toward the door, but I had installed a spring latch at the top. It had automatically locked when she shut it. Money well spent, $1.27. She spun back to face me, her light brown eyes devoid of panic, filled instead with cold calculation. I gestured towards the open door leading to the basement stairs. Down the stairs, Spooky. Unless you think you can take me. She hesitated for a moment, actually weighing the option. I raised an eyebrow. Seriously? Her gaze traveled over me, pausing on some of the more pronounced scars, then flicked to her unconscious partner. The odds weren't in her favor. With a shrug, she started towards the stairs. Seizing the skinny kid by the hood of his sweatshirt, I dragged him down the stairs with us, his body thumping heavily. She halted in the center of the basement, staring in disbelief at the two open graves awaiting them. Why? Her voice was surprisingly mature, rough around the edges, maybe tinged with the faint scent of cigarette smoke. Eugene? She looked at me blankly. Who the hell is Eugene? You didn't even bother to learn his name? Look, we didn't kill anyone. I shrugged. You will, sooner or later. It's just a matter of time. She appeared desperate, but refused to let panic show. I couldn't help but admire her composure. I guess Eugene is the guy Duarte shot, she stated matter-of-factly. She continued calmly, her eyes fixed on the graves. I knew that was trouble. He promised he wouldn't do it again. Really? And you believed him? Not really. I was planning to ditch him after this job. Move on. He wasn't listening anymore. A faint, ironic smile tugged at the corner of her mouth. I was worried he'd drag us into serious trouble. Her smile twisted as she pondered something. So, the whipped cream? They didn't have a banana cream pie. We were that bad. A real joke, huh? Mostly him. You're the real deal, though, aren't you? One of them. I removed Duarte's shoes and dropped them into the grave. It's a shame, Spooky. You're damn good. Really? Yeah. Even when I knew you were around, I only caught you because this knucklehead kept poking his head up like a prairie dog. A hint of pride shone through her demeanor, like a child praised by a teacher. I've always been good at that. You learn to disappear in foster homes. You've got genuine talent. Thanks. Her tone held a touch of nostalgia. She paused, then asked, Is that why you keep calling me Spooky? Love me. I knew better. Damn it. After all these years, I should damn well know better. Every farm kid knows you don't give them names. I glanced at her. She was still fixated on the graves. Spooky had no clue what she'd just done. I hadn't even realized I'd dubbed her with that name until she questioned it. Now all I could hear was Eugene's plea for their lives echoing in my mind. That's all it had been. He didn't want them dead. He just wanted them stopped. I dropped Duarte by the nearest grave and walked back to the stairs, taking a seat to collect my thoughts. I had a toolkit nearby, so I pulled it out and started fiddling with the lock, needing something to occupy my mind. She glanced over, sensing a shift but unsure of its nature. She chose to remain quiet and patient. Like I said, she was damn good. Perhaps too good. And too wild to release back into the world. A small part of me argued it wasn't entirely her fault. Another part countered that the fault didn't matter. If I turned her in, she'd be out in a few years. Tougher, more hardened, and full of resentment. I had one option. If it worked. If they were willing to take in strays. Give me your clothes, Spooky. A resigned look crossed her face as she began stripping. She clearly thought this was about something else, refusing to react. It gave me the impression she'd been through something similar before. I retrieved a utility knife from the worn toolbox and started cutting her jeans into strips. She watched me warily. I won't resist if... Don't flatter yourself, Spooky. You're too young for me. I inspected her sweatshirt and handed it back to her. I just want to ensure you stay put while I check on something. Put the sweatshirt on. It's chilly down here. She complied silently. As I bound her, I briefly thought she might fight, but after a tense moment, she relaxed and allowed me to finish without resistance. Her expression remained inscrutable as I lowered her into the grave. The skinny guy was still unconscious, so I tied him securely before depositing him into the other grave, lying on his side. I ascended the stairs, took a quick shower, dressed, and headed out. It took 3 calls. First Howard, then another number. Finally, I waited 30 minutes by the payphone in the laundromat, finishing it under the harsh fluorescent lights. The phone rang just as I turned the last page. The last call was short. A familiar, albeit rusty voice cautiously giving approval. That was all I needed. Returning to the house, I halted at the top of the stairs. I could see her legs. She had somehow wriggled free from her bonds and climbed out of the grave, now sitting at its edge with her legs dangling in. He remained tied at the bottom, gazing up at her with a mix of anger, panic, and disbelief. Descending, she glanced up briefly as I approached, then returned her gaze to the dark depths. She didn't flinch as I hauled Duarte up and onto the basement floor. Leaving him there, I fetched a cinder block from beneath the stairs, then retrieved a worn ball-peen hammer from the toolbox and placed it by her feet. Now what? Now you save Duarte's life. She glanced at me with a slight shiver, likely noticing that I hadn't mentioned anything about her own fate. I retrieved a cinder block and loosened one of Duarte's hands, leaving the other tied to his belt behind his back. He struggled, but it didn't matter much. Pick up the hammer. 2 trigger fingers, 2 kneecaps, 2 ankles. When I took the hammer from Spooky's hand, I was certain she understood. She had effectively saved him. Duarte would serve time in prison, but he wouldn't pose a threat when he got out. After he stopped screaming into his gag, I ensured he understood. Monsters are real. He had been a scavenger pretending to be a monster, but he would never become one. Not ever. He simply didn't have it in him. And if he ever tried again, a real monster would come for him. I'd see to it. We waited down there for another 6 hours, mostly just staring at each other. Duarte remained curled up on his side, refusing to look at Spooky or me. I heard the door open upstairs and slowly led Spooky up, still clad only in her sweatshirt. Donna stood in the center of the room, flanked by her human Dobermans. She glanced over Spooky, down at the discarded can of whipped cream, and smiled wryly. "You still know how to show a girl a good time, don't you?" She didn't wait for my response, stepping towards the girl and unrolling the black eyeless hood in her hands. "Wait," came a small voice, more timid than she'd ever used before, I think. Donna cocked her head slightly, raising an eyebrow as Spooky turned toward me. She cautiously reached up and pulled me down a bit to kiss her. The gesture lingered before she let go slowly and turned towards Donna, looking back at me over her shoulder. "I'm not too young for you, you know." Our eyes met as Donna slid the hood over her head. I dropped Duarte off in the park with the now broken Kimber in his waistband. He ended up serving 4 years. Eugene intervened on his behalf, getting the charges reduced and even offering him a job at the sandwich shop upon his release. Like I said, Eugene was one of the good guys. Sadly, Duarte later passed away from diabetes, which I suspect was partly my fault. Exercise likely posed more challenges for him than most. Sorry, Eugene. That left Spooky. This time I didn't miss her. She walked into the shack like she owned the place, a single piece of airline luggage rolling behind her. Monster immediately took notice, recognizing another predator instantly. She made a beeline for the bar and hoisted herself onto a stool. There was a sparkle in her eyes, more life than she had when we last parted, perhaps more than she'd ever had. I recognized it. She had purpose now, real reasons for what she did, with genuine meaning behind her actions. "It took me 8 years to pry your name out of Donna, another 4 to track down your address. So what now?"